Hello, my name is Donovan Schaefer, and I'm with RVW Wealth. We are the financial advisor to your company's 401k plan. Now, today we're going to talk about that 401k plan. And when I give these presentations, I'm often asked to basically dumb things down as much as I can, almost to like a first grade level. Now, I push back against that request because I think it's even better if we can push ourselves just a little bit and if we can all try to grow a bit with the idea that we're going to put ourselves in a position to feel more empowered, more in charge, more in control of our own financial future. Now, I will keep things simple, but there are going to be probably some new ideas, maybe new concepts, new things, but that should be understandable and that should really empower you. So, with that in mind, I am going to be working on the assumptions that you are an adult and in a position of taking on these kinds of responsibilities, particularly for your own future and benefit, and that you know how to use a computer. Before going further, I do want to say that 401k plans are very confusing. And I think in a lot of ways they're unnecessarily confusing, but it just has to do with the history and how these laws were passed and how different things were created. And I'm telling you this because I want you to know that if at any point any of this does seem confusing to you, you should never feel bad or guilty about that. You should never feel like something about a 401k plan that is confusing to you says anything at all about your own intelligence or your own ability. It is an inherently confusing topic, and it's not your fault. It's the fault of the legislators and other people who kind of created things in the way that they did. Just to illustrate this point, I'll walk you through a very brief history of how we kind of got to where we are. So, in the 1950s, there were the old school retirement plans at companies like Ford, General Motors, General Electric, and you would work there for 2, 3 decades and you were pretty much set. And they acted in a very paternal way and took care of you and made sure you were paid enough of an income to live out the rest of your years comfortably. Those plans, unfortunately, ultimately failed. They were mismanaged and fell apart in the 70s and 80s. As a result of that, there was a large tax bill passed in the late 1970s. It actually had nothing to do with fixing the pension plan retirement system that already existed. It was completely unrelated to that. It was like 1,000-page tax bill, but there's this one man, I think his name's Tony Bana, who saw in that 1,000-page document one page that created a loophole. He took advantage of that loophole to create what we now call the 401k plan. And by pure coincidence, and maybe not so surprising, Congress itself was so incompetent in many ways that it just decided to run with the loophole that this guy had identified and said, gee whiz, let's just make this the preferred path for retirement saving for everyone in the country instead of actually coming up with better legislation and better overall proposals. That's partly why you end up with the very confusing, frustrating, somewhat idiotic state that we have today. For those of you who are Johnny Cash fans, I like to use the analogy from this song called One Piece at a Time. And in the song, there's a man working at a General Motors factory on the assembly line, and he gets this idea that he's going to steal, one part every year or every couple months or something like that. And then after 20 years, when it's all done, he puts the car together. But of course, nothing fits because it's all from different model years, right? Here you can see the hood doesn't match the fender. It's even hanging over a bit in the front. The door clearly doesn't line up. And I think it's a good analogy for the 401k system and how, like I've described, it's a little bit confusing because you have this what was originally a tax loophole that then Congress embraced, and then they did pass laws and things after that to modify this loophole. So it becomes like something that wasn't exactly ideal in the first place. And then you put all these patches and all these band-aids on it and all these other things, and it ends up looking kind of like this. But the caveat here is that imagine it's a car like this that is also insanely fast, faster than any other car on the road. Yes, it looks like a patchwork. Yes, it's a jalopy. Yes, it's a little bit confusing. And if you took it to a mechanic, the mechanic might say, I don't know what the heck to do here. But it is an extremely fast car. That's what your 401k is like. Again, a bit confusing, kind of weird, doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. The laws around it don't necessarily make a lot of sense, but it is outrageously better than any other conceivable retirement option, any other account you could use to save for retirement than anything else out there. Believe it or not, there can be as many as 5 different companies involved in a 401k plan. I'm not telling you this to overwhelm you. I'm telling you this because I really want you to know and understand that if there's something, say you get in the mail or a change you want to make or anything you want to do with respect to your 401k plan, it can be confusing to figure out who to talk to or who to reach out to. But I want you to know that you can always reach out to me, that I'm here to help you. So I'll go back to that first slide real quick where you can see my contact information and, pause now and write it down or whatever. So if you're ever wanting to do something with respect to your 401k plan, it can be related to the type of financial advisor services that we provide, but it could also be related to something else. And if you're not sure who to call or who to contact, absolutely, absolutely feel free to reach out to me. And if it is a question that needs to go to the TPA or the record keeper or your HR department or some other thing, I will help steer you in the right direction. Okay, so just please, please, please don't hesitate to call, email, or reach out to me in any way. I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but I'm including this slide because I want you to feel comfortable approaching me and not thinking I'm just some stuffy guy in a suit or something like that. I'm a family man. I've got a wife and a 2-year-old and another baby on the way. There I am in a silly Christmas sweater. And for those Game of Thrones fans out there, I can do a pretty good Tormund impersonation. Granted, that was in the deepest depths of COVID, and I let my beard and everything get a little crazy. But anyway, the whole point again of this slide is just I really want you to feel comfortable, confident, and empowered to reach out to me and talk to me about anything you need help or support with in the 401k plan. Turning now to actually saving for retirement. It might sound like a dumb question, but we actually have to pause for a moment and think about why should we be saving at all? What's the point of setting aside money? And, there can be an emergency fund, just sort of you don't know what you don't know. And there are a variety of different reasons, but also, and I think most importantly, we have to save up money for a lot of the biggest and very often some of the most meaningful or important seeming purchases that we will make in our life, whether it's buying a new home, a car, a wedding, education for ourselves or our children, or even just a badly needed vacation or something, an adventure of some kind that you've always wanted to go on. The woman who used to cut my hair used to follow around a band called Iron Maiden all over the country, and she'd go to Brazil and parts of Europe, and those were expensive trips that she had to plan for and save up money to do. And so, regardless of your own quirks and unique interests, very often anything of a significant punchy, meaningful impact for us is something we need to save money for. Now, what does this have to do with retirement? Well, in my experience, I've been talking to uh, hundreds and thousands of people. It's very often the case that retirement is kind of the last thing that gets attention here. People will save up for each of these incremental purchases, but it's not until much, much later that they start thinking about retirement. And unfortunately, by then it's a lot harder. I don't want to say it's too late, but it's easier to get ahead of this the earlier you take care of it in your own life. One of the things that's important to know and understand is that when you retire, there's a good chance you'll be able to get some kind of a social security benefit, but the quality of life that you can get with a social security benefit is is about the same as the quality of life that you can get living on a minimum wage job. So you have to think about what it would be like to live on a minimum wage salary at a time when you're much older and physically, and medically more kind of feeble and dependent a little bit. And so whatever you can save and put aside into this kind of retirement bucket is what's going to help lift you up and above and help you do better than living in that kind of minimum wage, frankly, probably not very happy lifestyle that it would be otherwise. And so, again, it's often overlooked, but we need to start, if we're setting aside a little bit of money for a car or a house or all of these other things, we also need to think about how we're doing that in ways that isn't neglecting what we set aside for retirement. Now that we've established the need to save money for retirement, the next question becomes, what do you do with that money? And it's very important to understand that we need to invest that money and not just have it sit, as a pile of cash somewhere or something along those lines, maybe, in a checking account or whatever. It needs to be in some kind of an investment account and invested, and ideally in your 401k account because of a lot of tax benefits that you'll get. And one of the major reasons for that is something called inflation, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with inflation. When you look at the impact of inflation over really long time periods, like here, if we compare the price of a Coke in 1960 to today, that's about a 65-year time period. It really adds up and it becomes a kind of a big deal. Here you can see a Coke ends up costing 6 times more. In practice, that kind of means that the money you've saved, if you did just keep it in a checking account or stuff it under a mattress, that money would be about 1/6 as valuable, not nearly as valuable if you'd done something else with it or invested it. To give a more contemporary example, here's Dollar Shave Club. And you can see when they first started offering it in 2011, it was $6 per month. Now it's up to $8.50 a month. That's about a 50% increase. I'm wanting you to understand that over the type of time frame that we're talking about, such as saving money for retirement, inflation can become an important negative factor. But I also don't want you to feel discouraged by this because on a year-to-year basis, inflation is typically really only about 2 to 3%. It's just when you add up a bunch of years over a long time period, it ends up looking like a much bigger deal. Now, in comparison to that, bonds as an investment, like basically owning the debts of companies, those have returned about 5 to 6% per year. And stocks have returned over the long term on average about 9% per year. There's a lot of volatility, things go up and down, but if you hold it for something like 10 years or so, you tend to average out about around those levels. And when you look at those numbers, 9%, 5 to 6%, and then comparing that to the 2 to 3% that's inflation, If you're investing your money in those ways, you're going to stay very well ahead of inflation. And in fact, your investments and savings are going to be growing quite significantly. And that's going to be a big help for you in the future with retirement. Now, what I want to try to explain to you and help you understand is the idea that the 401k plan, the 401k account that you have available through your company's your company's 401k plan is really the most powerful way to save for retirement. And I'm going to use an analogy that we can all relate to, hopefully, um, which is going to a party. And I'm using some images from the popular TV show Severance just for fun here. It's one that my wife and I enjoyed. I hope you do as well. So when you go to a party, especially if it's like at a nightclub or some other thing like that, we're familiar with the idea of there being an entry fee. A bouncer at the door won't let you into the event until you pay some money. Then when you get in there, you have to buy your own drinks. If it's a particularly lame party, you might even, have to bring your own balloons or whatever. And then when it's done, you have to pay an Uber driver to drive home, to get home safely. It's not that great. I consider this to be more of a lame party, especially because you're having to buy your own drinks and bring your own balloons. This is what it's like to be in a normal investment account. When you're getting paid by your employer, if you're not participating in the 401k plan, you're getting that paycheck with taxes withheld. And that's kind of the entry fee that you're having to pay just to collect that money. Then, if you did decide to do something with it and save any portion of it for retirement or for some other purpose, you would then put it in a regular an investment account. And when you're in a regular investment account, I think of that as kind of like the lame party room. When you're in that room, when you're in that type of an account, you get nickeled and dimed the whole time. Every time there's a dividend that gets paid or um, some kind of distribution from a mutual fund or interest payments on bonds. There's all kinds of little things here and there that there's a chance you're just reinvesting all of that to help compound the investment growth or your investment portfolio. But you're getting hit with these taxes. You're really getting sort of nickeled and dimed all the way along the way while you're in this, quote unquote, lame party room, if you will. And then when it comes time to actually take this money out of the account, or sell the investments to pay for your retirement, you're going to get hit again with capital gains taxes and other things that is just going to make your money won't stretch as far as it would otherwise. So instead of the lame party version of events, because you have a 401k, you can do the really fun version of the party. There's no entry fee. Your contributions to the 401k go straight in there and they don't get hit with income taxes on the way in. This is like rolling out the red carpet, come on in. And then once you're in the 401k account, all of those investments can grow and grow and grow. And every time there's a dividend or an interest payment or some other little thing happening inside that account or inside this magical party room, there are no taxes. You don't get nickeled and dimed. You don't get hit over and over again. And that's kind of like, like going somewhere to a party and there's an open bar, right? And then the only point where you do pay taxes is, well, you've had such a great time and it was an open bar, so you're certainly not going to drive home. So you need to get an Uber to go home. And in this case, those are income taxes that you do pay when you're taking money out of the retirement account eventually. But also, when you're in retirement, a lot of times people slow down a little bit and they may not need as much in terms of their expenses to take out and cover everything, right? So it's often the case that you can manage this fairly well over time so that you're not actually in a very high tax bracket. So it's a pretty darn good version of events. a lot of people have an interest in making Roth contributions. If you're interested in Roth contributions, it's and those are available with your 401k plan. It's a very similar situation. It's still the same 401k plan. The payments, the money that you put in the plan though is just treated a little bit differently. It basically gets tagged or labeled or however you want to call it as being taxed in the beginning instead of taxed at the end, like we saw last time with the Uber ride. I should say there's no version of this where you don't ever get any tax whatsoever. There's, the best you can do is this type of situation where either you're taxed at the end or with a Roth contribution, you're taxed at the beginning, but it's much better to be paying taxes just one time instead of paying taxes 3 times. Okay, now I want to zoom in a little bit on the magical party room here, which again sounds a bit silly, but bear with me because it's not really an exaggeration to say that there's a certain kind of magic that's happening inside that room when you're not getting hit with all the nickel and dime. I'm sure a lot of you listening to this or watching this video have heard of the idea of compounding. That you invest money and then the growth compounds and blah, 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 and then you're a multi-billionaire or whatever. There's truth to that. There's some serious truth to that. That does oversimplify things, but it's also very real. And what's happening with compounding is that you are making money on the money that your money is making. That's still confusing. But the idea is that every time you get an interest payment or a dividend payment or one of these distributions from a mutual fund or some other thing like that, anytime anything like that happens in the party room, if you're in a 401k plan or some other retirement plan, you are not getting taxed along the way for each one of those times when things get kind of recycled or come back around. So your money ends up compounding much, much faster. Here, I'm going to show you what this looks like. So if we take $100 and invest it at a 10% growth rate over a 50-year time period, that $100 would grow to over $7,000. It's this blue line, this top blue line you can see here. So the traditional 401k, a 401k plan with a regular non-Roth contribution, you see the money grows, gets really, really high. In fact, it gets up to almost like $11,000. And then you get this big hit, which I'm just putting it here to illustrate the point, and so we don't forget that there would be taxes in the end here. However, those taxes would be spread out over much more time, right? It's not like you would hit the 50th year and then suddenly you'd owe, for every $100 you put in, suddenly you end up owing, $4,000, $3,000 or $4,000 in taxes. It's not like that. You would slowly do this over time, and then if you can kind of game it right, your tax rates would actually probably be even lower. But I'm showing it here as just this sudden hit to the balance because I just don't want us to pretend like that doesn't exist, right? But either way, you can see that you end up in a really, really good position and a much, much better position than what I'm calling the lame party room, where you're getting nickeled and dimed every moment along the way. Here you end up with less than half as much money. And you can actually see it. So I've zoomed in here with this little cutout, and you can see that $100 takes the hit of the initial tax payment in the first year, then starts growing. And it's growing, and it grows more slowly because of all the nickel and diming. And then you still also get this kind of a hit at the end. we can add in and show what that looks like if you do Roth contributions to a 401k account. And what's useful to see here is that when you do a Roth contribution, you do get that same hit in the very beginning that you're getting with a non-retirement account. But you don't have to pay the taxes in the end, and it kind of comes full circle, and you actually end up at the exact same point that you would with just more regular contributions. So there's not, you know, different people feel different ways around Roth versus regular contributions. I don't think that there's an extremely strong case to be made for favoring one over the other. Some people will just diversify and make half their contributions regular and the other half um, the other half Roth contributions. And really, what it comes down to is whether you think the law would change somehow so that you'd have a lower tax rate in the future, or not. So if you are afraid that everything's going to fall apart and the country's going to go broke or whatever, and then when you're in your retirement years, the tax rate is going to be jacked up in a very big way, increased in a very big way for everyone, and including wherever you are in the tax brackets, then it'd be better to pay the taxes now than later. I take a little bit of a different view where I think it's really better, instead of thinking about it from the standpoint of saying, hey, how do I really optimize and just do everything like a perfect genius and know exactly how I'm going to end up with the highest amount of money? I take an approach where you're trying to minimize, you're trying to reduce as much as possible the likelihood that you're going to end up regretting your decisions, basically. And so the way I think about this is I think no one really quite knows how taxes are going to be structured in the future and whether our own tax brackets are going to be lower or higher, or if it'll be more of a state thing versus a federal thing, and if you can move to another state and so on and so forth. So I think it's better to defer the taxes as long as you can, because if you get to your retirement years and you are extremely wealthy just based on how things have unfolded, and maybe you've had an incredibly fortunate life, you win the lottery, whatever, then you might end up paying more overall because you're in a higher tax bracket somehow. But at that point, it's not that big of a deal. You're in pretty good shape if you've won the lottery. Alternatively, if things don't go that way and you end up having a pretty rough life and some unexpected bad things happen, then I think you can make a good case that you'll be very glad that you didn't pay taxes earlier, because your money, as we see here with this blue line, will have grown to a much higher amount and than it otherwise would be, right? But let's say you're still actually kind of just you know having to, even to take this example, having $10,000 of retirement savings is not very much. But if you're in a very poor and desperate situation, it's going to feel like a lot more to you than otherwise. It'll mean a lot, and you'd rather have that $11,000 than the $7,000 or $8,000. And if things are really in bad shape like that, you're actually probably going to be in a pretty low tax bracket. So these two scenarios won't actually reconnect. This line that brings you down would actually not bring you down quite so far if it's truly played out in a way where you're kind of in a desperate situation. So, if you think about it as a safety net or a supplement, a way to supplement your safety net through Social Security, and you're really worried about kind of your worst case scenarios and you want to minimize how much pain you might be feeling that in those later years, then you would want to do regular contributions now. If you instead have a high degree of confidence that you're going to be really kicking ass and taking names, and you're going to be super rich and in a super high tax bracket, even when you're retired, because usually when people are retired, they actually slow down a bit, and so their income goes down because they're withdrawing smaller amounts of money to support themselves. If you think you're going to be the exception to that, then you would do Roth contributions. Um, this brings me to the limits of what you guys are going to be able to contribute in this year. The regular limit for most of us is going to be $23,500. There is a catch-up contribution you can make if you're 50 years old or older, and that's 7,500. And then there's some really weird, funky thing where if you're between 60 and 63, and including, so if you're 60, 61, 62, 63, then they let you do another 3,750. That just gets back to kind of how stupid all this is and unnecessarily complicated. But again, if you do have any questions, call me. We will figure it out.